Hello, Randy Williams, Keiretsu Forum. We're in segment 2 with Peter Henry, a wonderful esteemed Keiretsu Forum member last 3 years. He's also launching Keiretsu Ed. He'll talk about that a little bit, but we're going to launch into failure. We're going to talk about lessons learned, how to be a smarter, more efficient investor, angel investor, possibly investor in the public markets too. How do we recognize and how do we learn from our mistakes we've made? I think it's always disingenuous when VC or angels talk about their wins. That super, Nova that was a 40x, 50x. So let's talk about, possibly pitfalls or failures we've seen and what we learned from it, and we're still standing. So, Peter, what have you learned from opportunities that you thought were going hockey stick and didn't? They went the other direction. Lessons learned.
I think the biggest lesson I've learned, and I can think of 2 really distinct failures in my earlier angel investing days, where I learned something that I characterize as luck and timing are always the high order coefficients in the success equation. Hard work is there and all the other aspects of it, but fundamentally, luck and timing play such a big role, and if you're prepared for it, to take advantage of good timing when it comes along, that's great. But if you don't realize that timing may throw even the best idea out the window, then that's where you fail. We had an investment in a company that was building a personal security device. This was back in the early pre-iPhone days, the very early smartphone days, when the carriers owned the data channels and kind of dictated what went where. And the idea, in a nutshell, was this was a device that was going to keep your wife safe when she's walking to a parking lot at night, or your kid safe when they're walking from school, and they would use geofencing to make sure that if they got off track, that you'd know right away. It all sounded wonderful, but and it's still a great idea, ironically, but it turned out that the carriers were not ready to open up their application base to that whole idea. So we put a ton of energy and money into developing the process, developing the product, and shepherding it around to some carriers who gave us a deaf ear. And it was all about not understanding the timing of the overall marketplace and whether they were ready for something like that was, in essence, out of their control. Today, you could build that app and use it because the channels are wide open. So what about you? You've made, I think, 45, 50 investments just as part of Keiretsu. Surely at least one of them has blown up.
Well, in particular, I remember one I made 14 years ago, and the company was a competitor, a yet-to-be competitor with Siri, and it was too early. What I learned from that opportunity, the company called Voice Genesis went bankrupt, and I loved the application, the company, but they didn't have distribution. They didn't have the relationships. They didn't have Steve Jobs to walk into SRI and say, hey, I like that technology, license it to me. He had the distribution. So when I make an investment now, I make sure there's distribution channels, there's relationships. Just getting back to your carriers, a deaf ear, well, that's fascinating. So when I invest in a company now, I make sure I go to the customers and actually ask them, are you going to adopt this? Why, when, and how? And so where I've lost money is generally great ideas, great jockeys, CEOs, but it was too early. But that's why I started Keiretsu Forum. I needed mind share, I needed swarm intelligence, I needed a community, and we're fortunately 2,500 investors globally now that can help all of us without a vested interest be better investors. And so in Northern California, we have 4 chapters. We have over 300 members. Before I make an investment and get over my skis, I run it by Peter Henry. I run it by members. And when you act alone, that's a very dangerous place as an investor, both public and private, i.e. angel investor. So join an organization, join a group, but make sure when no one has a vested interest that's guiding you in a direction, oh, I'm a board member, you should invest, or I'm an advisor, or ask them, whoever's asking you for money, what's their interest? If they're the CEO, they want you to invest in the company. Sure. But there's so many tangential people around an opportunity asking you to invest, and usually they have a vested interest.
Interesting. So when you bring a company to the forum, we've got, the roadshow with 300 plus members attending the roadshow. Is there a threshold of interest for you in that, where there have to be 2 or 3 other people who are really likely to invest before you're going to get in? Is there a certain sort of minimum gang?
Well, personally, I like to invest historically on things I understand, and then I started moving to the next level, which are people like yourself that I respect. If Peter's in, I may consider it. But now I look at a myriad of things, but it's also about track record. I'm still a big believer in track record and wisdom and gray hair. And I mean, I love the dreamers out there, but the validation is revenue is very important to me. So that revenue has to be checked. And I love the R word, recurring. I have to be recurring. And so there's so many checkpoints, and that is something I can never, ever develop alone. I have to develop it with a community of investors. Help me be. And also, anybody who is watching this program, we have a free book. It's over 400 pages now. It's called the Keiretsu Forum Handbook, Due Diligence Handbook, and you can get it on our website, or you can get it on Apple bookstores. It's free, and it's for you to see how we think before we make an investment. Wow. Have you ever looked at it?
Yes, I have actually. I've got it on my iPad right over there.
Great.
You know, it's actually a good jumping off point, because getting educated about the process, whether you're an investor or an entrepreneur, I think changes the game for the better for everybody by creating better outcomes, right? I mean, smart investors get better outcomes, smart educated entrepreneurs get better outcomes, and when they're engaged with each other, they get doubly better outcomes. And so, you know, that's why we're launching Keiretsu Ed, to expand the ability of investors and entrepreneurs not just to learn the fundamentals, but also to interact with each other towards helping pitches become better, helping investors understand opportunities better, and helping them make their decisions with even a little bit more precision.
So obviously our companies have to execute. The CEO, she or he, has to get out there and execute on the business model. You know, we have to believe in the value proposition, the whole business aspect, business case. But when do they have time to listen to you, Peter? When do they have time to listen to their investors? And I mean, obviously, they're well-meaning. I mean, Safara's example, I think he has over 300 angels, of which I think over 200 are Keiretsu Forum. When does he have time to listen to us all?
Well,
how does he manage that?
That's a really great question, because it's hard to listen to that many voices. But it's almost like listening in a crowd for people you're familiar with. If you listen for for ideas that you're familiar with, or topics that you feel you need outside input on, then you can start to filter it down. I mean, the CEO of Savara is not going to be making 300 phone calls every week to 300 angels, but he's probably filtered it down to the topics that are interesting to him and mapped it to the people who he can go to for advice or counsel or interaction. Right. And I think that's hugely beneficial when you have that.
Well, entrepreneurs that have a choice, and not all of them have a choice, go after strategic money. Go after smart money that can help you grow. And so we at Keiretsu Forum, we really like our members to give advice. We like to have them offer guidance, love, but introductions. Yep. So how do you help a company grow?
So obviously, as a technologist, I can kibitz on the technology side and help companies recognize strengths and weaknesses in their technical side. But really, most of my recent experience, for the last 15, 16 years, tends to be more strategic in terms of recognizing where there's something over here that connects to something over here that they may not have seen. And saying, have you thought about this in your market, or have you thought about what happens here? I'll give you an example. The company that we talked about in the first segment, CardioThrive, is building a device that is going to basically make an AED a personal portable device. So in the course of doing due diligence, something popped into my head as I was looking at it that said, you know what? This company is going to become a customer service organization, a consumer customer service organization, whether it likes it or not, which is something that has nothing to do with the traditional model for their kind of device. And so I went back to them and said, have you thought about this? That you're going to put these things out in the hands of real, live, untrained individuals whose life depends on it, and if they have questions, you better be there on the other end of the line. And they hadn't really processed the fact that was an aspect of their business that they were going to have to attend to from day one. So that kind of thing is what I like to do, is kind of bring together disparate notions, whether they're technological or market-related or just basic strategies connecting, to make sure that everything is strengthened around a company.
So you haven't pulled the trigger with this company that you just alluded to, and they received your knowledge, and it's another vertical for them. So what will cause you to write the check? And he better not be listening, the CEO.
Well, actually, I think he probably knows what I'm going to say, which is, in this particular case, I set a threshold that we included in the due diligence that said you need to raise 80% of your target raise, which is mapped to your milestones, before I'll write my check. Because I don't want to write the first check and then have the second, third, and fourth, and fifth checks not show up, because that won't get anywhere. So I look for a company that has raised enough enthusiasm around their idea that they've soft-circled most of the money they need before making the final commitment. And they can go around and tell everyone that. I mean, they can say, hey, if you guys are in, Peter's in. I also look for at least one larger strategic investor. I'm not investing $1 million at a time. So if somebody needs $2.5 million, I'm looking for somebody strategic who's ready to write a reasonably big chunk of that and be a part of it to help get the ball rolling, and then we can get the rest of us signed up.
So what's the time frame on this challenge check? In other words, you're challenging the CEO to exercise and produce results. You have a time frame that you're asking him to do this?
Not a hard time frame, but if he thinks he needs to raise the money in 90 days, if it's not happening, if there isn't visible momentum towards that threshold, that 80% threshold within the first 30 to 45 days, then we've got to go back and look at the whole notion of what it is they're trying to raise and why.
So does your wife help you invest?
She encourages me not to make mistakes.
Yes. Isn't that great? That's a great litmus test. You listen.
Actually, that's not the whole story. She's really a great sounding board, because I come home and tell her about the ideas I've seen, and she's a doctor, so she knows things about an arena that I know next to nothing about.
Yes. So we have hundreds of companies that come to Keiretsu, thousands, and one of them we had a 13X, which was a company called Clarisonic, Sonic Care for your skin.
My wife has one.
Yes, and I remember my wife wasn't at the forum that month, so guess what? I didn't have her as a sounding board, and I was really concerned about the IP. I thought it was going to get stolen, and I was wrong, and it was a 13X to our investors. So with that, thank you so much for your valuable time, Peter.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Randy. This has been a great conversation.